He wasn't wrong, though. Our parents did indeed give him a lot of praise and attention, while they only ever yelled at me and even occasionally slapped me. Vincent, can't you do anything right? Why can't you be more like your older brother and get straight A's? I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm trying my best. And I do get good marks, just not as high as Scott's. Hi there, my name is Vincent, and my brother, and I have always had a terrible rivalry. It wasn't something that we had chosen to engage in, really, but our parents pretty much encouraged it. Well, actually, they pretty much forced it upon us. They always considered my older brother Scott to be their golden child. After all, he got better grades than I did, and he was always better at sports as well. I truly did try, though, but no matter how much I studied or how hard I trained, I just couldn't compete with him. Not to mention, I knew that Scott would one day be given my father's company, and I would be expected to be one of his employees, which meant that I would always be his servant, and that terrified me. My father owned a company that manufactured car parts, and he would constantly tell Scott that he would one day be given the company. Poor stupid Vincent. Such a shame that you're too stupid. Will you stop rubbing it in? School isn't a contest. Oh, but that's where you're wrong. It's a contest for mom and dad's attention and love, and you're losing big time. Ha, I'm just surprised that they chose to keep you instead of abandoning you at the side of the road. But then again, who would be my slave once we were older if they did that? I can't wait to constantly make you do the dirtiest and most awful jobs at the factory. He wasn't wrong, though. Our parents did indeed give him a lot of praise and attention, while they only ever yelled at me and even occasionally slapped me. Vincent, can't you do anything right? Why can't you be more like your older brother and get straight A's? I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm trying my best. And I do get good marks, just not as high as Scott's.
Well, it isn't good enough. Every time you bring home these subpar grades, we get more and more disappointed in you.
It was so demoralizing, and their constant abuse was beginning to make me feel constantly afraid. Every time I would receive a mark that was less than an A, I knew that they would yell at me until I cried, and more than likely would slap me hard enough to split my lip, while Scott just would watch and laugh at my pain. It got so bad that the sound of my father's feet coming up the stairs of our house would put me into panic mode. I just couldn't take much more of it, and so on the day when I turned 18, I quickly packed my bags and left a note saying that I wouldn't live with them another minute and that I was leaving. An hour after I left the house, my phone rang, and it was my parents. What on earth do you think you are doing? Get back here right now. There's no way that I will. I'm done with putting up with your abuse, and having the only thing to look forward to is to put up with Scott's abuse for the rest of my life. I'm an adult now, and I don't know what I'll end up doing, but regardless of what it is, it will be far better than the future that you and Mom planned for me. And with that, I hung up. It was true that I didn't really have much of a plan, but I did know that anything would be better than living with those cruel people. After a few more hours, I began to get hungry, and so I wandered into a restaurant that specialized in noodles. And after enjoying a very delicious meal, I saw that they were hiring, and I asked the owner if I could apply. Please, sir, can I apply to work in your kitchen? You? You want to work here? Shouldn't you be going off to college at your age? I told him about my life and what I had done, and he was incredibly sympathetic. Oh wow, that's a pretty tragic story. I'll tell you what, there's a small bachelor's apartment above the restaurant that you can use, and I'll train you and teach you everything I know. But you have to work incredibly hard and show me that you deserve it. Do we have a deal? I of course agreed. Not only was this a way to make money, but it came with a place to stay as well. Over the next few weeks, Gordon taught me all of his recipes and even allowed me to experiment and come up with a few of my own, some of which began to attract more and more patrons to the restaurant. I had impressed Gordon with how quickly I was learning how to cook, and he was doubly impressed that my cooking skills were increasing his sales as well. So much so that he gave me a handsome raise and approached me with an idea. Hey, listen, you've done amazing things here, and in an incredibly short time too. What do you say about maybe expanding this business with me? What do you mean? Well, I own property on the other side of town, and I was wondering if you would run a noodle shop there, like a franchise. You would have to hire your own staff and train them, and I would definitely increase your salary. What do you think? It sounded like a great idea to me, so of course I agreed. The first few weeks were very stressful, but my staff and I began to work well together like a well-oiled machine, and before long, we were making massive profits. We were doing so well that Gordon came to me and asked if I thought that we should expand again. At first, I looked at him like he was crazy, but then I realized that it hadn't been that difficult to train the new staff and get them to a point where they were making money. Gordon, I think it's a crazy idea but a brilliant one too. I think we should definitely keep expanding, but I'll only do it on one condition. What's your condition? That we do it as partners. After seeing how well you got this location in Shapey, I think you have a deal. And just like that, we became business partners. Before long, we had over 20 restaurants all over the country, and were making plans to open new ones in the neighboring countries as well. As it turned out, my expertise was never in math or anything I learned in school, but in making good business relationships. I was good with people, and that made me a great businessman. After a few years, we had grown quite the empire, and it was at that time that I got a phone call from my brother. I had always suspected that my family might reach out one day, but definitely was not prepared for what he demanded of me. Hey doofus. So I've heard some good things about you. Hey Scott, what exactly do you want? Easy there, little man. I'm just calling to give you a great opportunity. How would you like to invest in Dad's company? Dad's company? What are you talking about? Dad and I heard that you came into a little bit of money, and we wanted to give you a chance of helping the family out. How does 20% of the company in exchange for $1 million sound? It sounded like a scam to me, but I wasn't going to let on that I smelled deceit. That sounds like a pretty great idea. Let me talk to my financial advisor and see how I can shift some money around. I'll call you in a few days, okay? The second after I hung up the phone, I began scouring the internet for information about my father's company, and what I found made me laugh. As it turned out, the factory had been understaffed because of poor management and had been producing poor quality parts. Because of this, they had been losing contracts, and the value of the company plummeted to less than $250,000. My brother and father were indeed trying to scam me, but I wasn't going to fall for their nonsense. With this evaluation in mind, I then called the bank where my father's business dealt with and inquired about the status of his company. They told me that my father was in serious trouble. He had gained a significant amount of debt as he had kept borrowing money to keep his business afloat, and that if he didn't pay the bank $250,000 by the end of the week, that the company would be sold off to cover his debts. Hearing this gave me an idea, and all I had to do was wait a few days. All that week, my brother and father kept calling me and leaving messages on my voicemail, demanding that I call them back immediately. Of course, I never did, until Saturday, that is. Hey Dad, it's been a while since we've spoken. How are you doing? Terrible. You missed the deadline, and now the company is in ruin. Are you happy? You ruined the family business. No, Dad. You and Scott ruined the family business. As of a couple hours ago. I saved the family business, but I did it for much less than what you have been demanding from me. What are you talking about? Well, it's really simple. I bought your company from the bank, which means I'm now your boss. And as my first act as your boss, both you and Scott are fired. Ha! You can't be serious. Oh, I very much am. In fact, security guards should be entering your office right now to escort you and Scott off of my property. Just then, I could hear a scuffle as security guards dragged my father and brother out of their office and out of the building. The sounds of their wailing as they were dragged away was music to my ears. Months later, I had been able to broker new contracts for the factory and had hired experts in the industry to fix the many issues that had plagued the company under my father's and brother's leadership. With some elbow grease and the skills I had learned working with Gordon, I was able to make the company profitable again. I still maintained my partnership with Gordon, of course, but I figured that it didn't hurt to diversify a bit. As for my parents and brother, after being kicked out of their company, they tried to sue me, but my lawyers made sure to tie them up in court until they ran out of money. Now the three of them work minimum wage jobs and occasionally try to call me to yell at me for ruining their lives. The tragedy of it is that they, of course, did this to themselves, but are too stubborn to see it that way. So in the end, I got the last laugh. My parents had always treated me terribly and treated Scott like a winner, but in the end, I proved that they had backed the wrong son. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
Sorry, Kevin, someone else is calling. I'll call back in a minute. Hello? Who is this? What are you talking about?
How could you do this, you slimy bitch?
You and your son are horrible people.
You were supposed to give me grandbabies and take care of my boy. Now he's gotten one of his whores pregnant, but because of that horrible video that's circulating, she's going to force him to pay child support. Another one of them slashed his tires, but before she did that, she beat my son and even broke his nose.
My name is Natalie, and my soon-to-be husband, Albert, has been a strong-minded man since I met him. We had met through a dating app, and our first few dates went so well that we quickly moved in with each other. About a year after we moved into the same apartment, Albert proposed to me. I hadn't even met his parents yet, but I loved Albert, so I accepted the proposal. Oh, Albert! Of course I'll marry you. We started making plans for the wedding right away, but Albert wasn't the most helpful when planning the wedding because he was busy with his new promotion at work. I was thankful that my brother Kevin was always available to help. Kevin is my older brother, and ever since I can remember, he supported me. Our parents got divorced when we were younger, and even though we were raised by different parents, Kevin always made sure to keep in touch. So instead of my father walking me down the aisle for my wedding, I chose Kevin, and he soothed my nervousness. Getting married was a big step. At first, I'd refused to leave my changing room even though the dress fit me perfectly.
It will be fine, Natalie. You love the guy. This is your big day, and after the stuffy ceremony, you'll have a great party at the reception.
You're right. It's just wedding jitters. I'm a bit worried about meeting his parents.
It's a bit odd you haven't met them yet, but maybe they're quiet people. Our parents are likely to start some arguments tonight, so that's what I'm worried about. But don't worry, I'll handle them.
Kevin was able to reassure me. Things would be okay, as long as I didn't do something silly like run out on the wedding. Kevin led me out of my changing area to the large closed doors for the ceremony, and once he pushed them open, the music started and people turned to stare. After the tense walk up the aisle, Kevin let me stand in front of Albert. Albert was handsome in his suit, but it was strange that there was a woman standing next to him. She must be his mother because their faces looked very similar. All I knew about her was that her name was Sylvia. Albert, is that your mom?
She insisted that she accompany me to the altar, which is ridiculous. I'm not a girl.
It wasn't the first time that Albert had said something like that, but this time he didn't have the opportunity to apologize or make it seem less misogynistic. An uncomfortable feeling settled in my stomach, but then the officiant properly began the ceremony. Albert and I had both decided on writing our own vows, and I read mine first. My vows were simple, that I loved him and would always be faithful. When it was his turn to read his vows, Albert's mother handed him a piece of paper that he read from.
As my lovely wife, I expect you to be faithful to me and support me in anything I choose to pursue. I expect you to cook and clean. I also expect you to care for my mother as if she were your own, and to listen to her like a daughter should. In return, I will love you and provide a home for our family.
Once again, there was an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach, even if nothing was necessarily wrong. His vows seemed more self-centered than I expected of him. He seemed satisfied with himself, but when I opened my mouth to speak, the officiant continued.
And does anyone in the crowd have any reason these two should not be wed?
Stop. I can't do this.
Darling, what's wrong? You were fine just a moment ago. Don't be getting cold feet now.
This whole thing just felt off to me, and maybe I was overreacting, but we hadn't talked about his mother being with us at the altar like this. That small change in our plans set off alarm bells in my mind.
You can't run from this girl. I own you. That's what you've agreed to.
Own me? What?
The vows you agreed to be my perfect daughter, and now I own you.
Stop the wedding. I'm not getting married. Not today.
Darling, my mother is overreacting. Once we're married, she won't have so much nervous energy.
I am not overreacting, young man. Marry this girl now so you can get on with your life and find some other nice young ladies to date.
I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. Had this been some sort of setup this entire time? Wait, did you just want to marry me to be some sort of live-in servant? Albert hadn't ever treated me poorly, but he did spend a lot of extra time at work, and he supported me financially, so I did all the work in the house. Was I just a maid to him? Was he having affairs when he said he was working late?
Of course. I mean, having a warm body in bed with me at night is nice too, but I've never been a one-woman kind of guy, darling. I love you, but not much more than any other woman I've slept with. But none of them are willing to clean the house or have kids like you, and a man needs those things.
I couldn't stand it anymore. This wasn't the Albert I knew. Sometimes he said horrible things about women like this and treated them like objects, but normally he seemed slightly ashamed of those views. Now he was clinging to that nasty mindset and I didn't know him anymore. I backed away from the altar, but then Albert just laughed.
Don't you remember? We eloped months ago and waited so we could have the ceremony with both your parents and their new spouses. We're already married. All this celebration is just for show.
Albert was right. We had technically eloped and gotten our marriage legally recognized months ago. It just hadn't felt real to me yet since we hadn't had the ceremony. I couldn't protest the marriage, even if I left the ceremony that we'd spent so much money on. The officiant looked like he very much wanted to leave.
Smart move, my boy. Lock down the girl early so she can't get away.
You can't own anybody, and if Natalie wants to leave, she should. You'll be hearing from my lawyer because this wedding just turned into a divorce.
What a waste of money. The ceremony will continue.
Kevin walked right up to Sylvia and Albert, and for a moment I was worried that Kevin would hurt them.
Not a chance. Our parents may have made our lives hard, but this is the least they could have done for Natalie. Our family paid for this wedding, so your family can leave. I never want to see your faces again.
Things were tense after that, even though Albert's family did leave. My family did make sure that the reception hall and the catered food didn't go to waste, but I didn't feel well enough to have fun. Instead, I took Kevin's keys and sat by myself in his car since he'd driven me here. After the party, Kevin let me stay at his apartment for the night before we talked about everything in the morning over coffee.
He was way out of line. I'll get in contact with my lawyer and we'll find you the best divorce attorney. Albert basically fully admitted to cheating on you and planning to do it in the future in front of dozens of witnesses. You'll get your divorce and he'll probably have to pay you too.
I took Kevin's advice and his help. He had plenty of connections to lawyers since he'd gone to law school. Even though Kevin dropped out because he realized he'd rather run his own business instead, he kept in touch with plenty of his schoolmates. The lawyer he put me in touch with was good at her job. Together, with the help of some of my younger cousins who had filmed the events at the wedding, we pushed through a divorce with Albert. All Albert had to do was sign the papers and pay me.
I won't sign these. You married me. It's not my fault you have bad judgment.
Then go marry one of your whores that you were seeing behind my back.
Maybe I will. I can find someone better than you anyway.
The argument continued, but he eventually gave up and signed the documents. Soon, the divorce was finalized, and a good portion of Albert's savings were transferred into my bank account. The video of Albert and Sylvia's misogynistic comments was posted online. I'm not sure if it was Kevin's doing, or if one of my cousins thought it might be funny. The video got a lot of engagement, and all of Albert's affairs eventually found out exactly what he'd done. With the money I got in the divorce, I was able to get a small house. I decided that after this whole mess, I wanted to be single for a while and get a few pets. What I didn't expect was a phone call from an unknown number, interrupting my call with Kevin. Sorry, Kevin, someone else is calling. I'll call back in a minute. Hello? Who is this? What are you talking about?
How could you do this, you slimy bitch?
You and your son are horrible people.
You were supposed to give me grandbabies and take care of my boy. Now he's gotten one of his whores pregnant, but because of that horrible video that's circulating, she's going to force him to pay child support. Another one of them slashed his tires, but before she did that, she beat my son and even broke his nose. She is a boxer and was furious after hearing my boy is married. And then, after all that, one of them is a secretary at his company, and she accused him of sexual harassment and forcing her, so he got fired from his job. And there's impending criminal charges. And now there's no one to take care of me in my old age. You're a monster.
He deserve it.
What did you say?
Nothing. I laughed and hung up on her before she could finish her rant. Nothing she yelled at me made me feel bad. Her and Albert had done that to themselves. I wasn't going to let anyone try and own me ever again. Luckily for me, I met someone at the gym I trained, and we are engaged now. He is a loving partner and doesn't have a toxic mother. Thanks for watching. The impending criminal charges against Albert eventually did go to court, and I followed all the updates. He did have to pay child support to the woman he'd gotten pregnant, and he got sentenced to a year in prison with a big fine for harassment. As for Sylvia, she was left alone like the miserable old woman she was. With no one to take care of her, she had to make sure she could pay all of her bills herself since Albert couldn't anymore. She'd taken multiple part-time jobs to try and pay her bills, and in her free time, she yelled in public spaces about how she didn't deserve to be alone. There were even videos of her on the news of her nonsense rants. It was honestly embarrassing, because it really was her fault. But no one believed her anyway, and the news station had labeled her as the local crazy lady in all of their footage. Thanks for watching.
You're teaching them to grow up to be bad people.
How? Almost everybody celebrates Halloween. And like Luke said, I'm their mother, not you.
I don't care. You've dragged all of our future generations down a very dark and demonic place. And you've ruined the lawn with those stupid decorations. I really do regret letting my precious son marry you.
I ran to my room crying. Now she was saying that Luke shouldn't have married me? Hey everybody, happy Halloween. It's finally that time of the year again, but I have a story I wanted to share. It is about my mother-in-law and how she changed Halloween for my family forever. This took place a few years ago, when my children were quite young. We lived in a neighborhood that many kids also lived in, so it was a busy community where many people could get together and make new friends constantly. My mother-in-law's name is Tracy, and I'll just make a few things clear first. She absolutely hated children, which was weird because her son is literally my husband, Luke. She also despised noisy settings, and we lived right in the middle of one. I constantly offered to buy a house for her in a quiet area just a few miles down the road, but she refused. So anyway, this story happened about a few years after she moved in with us. My family always loved Halloween, so I grew up loving it as well. We would do all sorts of activities together, like house decorating, trick-or-treating, and even going to haunted houses. But soon after I'd met and married Luke, I was very surprised to find out that he'd never gone trick-or-treating even once in his entire life. I wanted to get him in on the fun, and I was fairly successful because he then started dressing up and passing out candy with me together. After considering kids for a while, I got pregnant and we adopted an adorable little cat. About 3 years after our kids were born, Tracy asked to move in. I agreed happily, thinking that she could maybe help lessen some of the stressful chores and tasks we couldn't do, now that we had to take care of the toddlers. But I really hadn't known her real side, because turns out, she didn't help at all. Tracy basically lived in our home for free without any sort of payment. And on top of that, she was rude and sloppy too.
Julie, move your kid out of the living room. He's crying too much.
Ma, I'm sorry, but I have so many errands to run, and I can't trust putting him out of sight from an adult.
Oh my God. All the kids expect their parents to just be free babysitters after their children are born, huh? As the generation after, you're supposed to be serving your elders, not making them become your personal servants.
I just asked if you could keep an eye on him for a minute or two.
And I just said that I'm not helping you. You have never done anything for me, so why should I help you?
I was completely stressed out from everything that had happened, so I was obviously very excited to pass out candy to other kids to make myself feel a little better after having to work constantly to feed my family. Luke and I set up a routine together so that we could manage how to drop the kids off at daycare, then pick them up, and all of that. We were also able to slip in time for the gym and other things we usually did before having kids. Tracy never stopped being an ass, but I was determined to not let her bother my feelings in my own home. So I attempted to just butter her up and brush aside all her rants about kids not deserving of anything.
God, do those kids next door ever shut up? They just play all day and never stop screaming.
Mom, it's summer break. I think that the kids over there deserve to have some fun after a long year of studying.
Ugh, what kind of hard work have they done? I've been through much worse than them, and you don't see me acting all rowdy and shit like that.
Yeah. Maybe you should go ask them to be a little quieter.
Oh, I will. Stupid kids will learn.
Hearing Tracy voicing all of her derogatory ideas made me a little uncomfortable, especially since I literally had 2 children now. What happens if they grow up and are just trying to play, but my mother-in-law decides to belittle them just for trying to have fun? I brought up my concerns with Luke, and he was also worried too. Babe, don't you think your mom is being a little weird about hating kids so much?
She's always been like this. I never saw anything wrong before, but I see what you mean now since we have kids.
You said your mom forbade you from ever doing Halloween, right?
Yeah, why?
Well, I'm screwed then.
You're fine. Just ignore my mom. She'll probably just rant over a bunch of her beliefs, but I really don't think she'll do anything too bad.
After talking to Luke, I knew that October 31st was not going to be a pleasant day in my house. Now knowing that Tracy has never let Luke trick-or-treat, I could tell that she was incredibly strict about the holiday. Trying to take Luke's advice, I set up my decorations for Halloween and bought a costume. I even got little ones for the kids and my husband. Since Tracy never leaves the house, she didn't notice all of the spooky characters and spiders hanging from the plants outside. That was a relief. I just had to hide the costumes for a few weeks, and then I could have my long-awaited fun. Halloween finally arrived. I was very happy and spent almost the whole day doing my makeup and making sure that I had enough treats to share with the many kids that lived around our community. Luke even came home from work early so he could put his costume on and be on time for the first trick-or-treaters. But, of course, Tracy came into the picture just as the doorbell rang.
Who is it this time? What the hell?
Mom!
Are you forcing my son to engage in demonic behavior? I've taught him to be pure all of this time. He's a good person and you ruined him.
Tracy, all we're doing is passing out candy.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness.
Tracy was going into a full-blown panic mode, and although I felt a tiny bit bad, it was amusing to see her so worried after the 2 years of torture and weird speeches I've endured.
Where are the kids?
They're, out. Getting free candy.
You've got to be kidding. Kids don't deserve that stuff. Tell those things outside that you don't have candy. Where are your damn kids?
Mom! They're not even your kids. You seriously need to calm down right now.
I was very distraught from the whole situation, and Luke tried to comfort me. We watched as Tracy went outside and began to scream at the kids, demanding that they remove their makeup. The kids were relatively young, maybe only 10 years old, and I was furious when I saw their eyes welling up with tears. Mom, stop it! I was so upset and immediately gave the kids a lot of candy as an apology for Tracy's actions. Luke talked to his mom to distract her while I sat outside and gave away treats to passing kids. When the night had finally quietened down, my kids showed up with their big bags of candy. I did not want to go back inside because I wasn't ready to face my mother-in-law at all now, but I knew that I had no choice. I slowly opened the door and my kids and I walked inside. Tracy was sitting on the couch looking pissed and she was glaring at my kids.
You're teaching them to grow up to be bad people.
How? Almost everybody celebrates Halloween, and like Luke said, I'm their mother, not you.
I don't care. You've dragged all of our future generations down a very dark and demonic place. And you've ruined the lawn with those stupid decorations. I really do regret letting my precious son marry you.
I ran to my room crying. Now she was saying that Luke shouldn't have married me? I was already under a lot of stress from just Tracy living here, but this was a day where I really thought I'd be able to relax and have fun. And she's ruined it for me with her horrendous words. I woke up the next day and went outside to grab the mail. To my horror, all of my spiderwebs and skeletons had been torn to the ground and ripped into pieces. I was very shocked, and I looked at my neighbors' homes, and to my shock, they were destroyed as well. This had to be the work of Tracy. Where was she anyway? I knew she wasn't in the home since her shoes were gone. Weirdly enough, at that perfect moment, I heard someone making a blood-curdling scream, and I even got scared. The sound resonated down the street, and it really sounded like he was in some sort of pain. My cat was outside, and she began to stroll away. She probably knew where the noise came from. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed my cat only a block or so down the road. We were definitely in the right place because the wailing only kept getting louder. The noise was coming from the backyard, and I walked around some bushes to investigate, and I was shaken to my core. There Tracy was, my own mother-in-law. She was using a taser on several teenagers in the backyard, and they were howling in pain.
Shut up, shut up. I don't care if it's a party, shut up. You're disturbing my peace.
I'm sorry, ma'am. We would have kept it down if you just asked us nicely. Please.
I quickly grabbed my phone and began recording what was happening. After I recorded for 10 seconds, I screamed at Tracy, "Get off before I call the police."
I'm trying to punish them. What part of that do you not understand?
My cat jumped onto Luke's wicked mom and left some very red scratches on her arm and face. Screaming, Tracy threw my cat off and turned her weapon off, glaring at me with a hint of nervousness in her eyes. I called up Luke and explained what was happening very loud and clearly. She gulped and I almost let a smirk slip through, as we both knew she was done for. Luke also called the police, who arrived very shortly. They arrested Tracy for assault, and even an ambulance came by to make sure that the teenagers were okay. Luke immediately kicked his mom out, and after she got out of jail, she was put in a retirement home. The place was known to be very good for elderly, but Tracy just made it bad for herself by acting arrogant to the workers. I hear that she's still miserable to this day, although I'm not too sure since Luke refuses to even talk to her that often now. Our whole neighborhood had known that a grumpy woman lived in my home, but they soon found out all of what she'd said and done. They were saddened that Halloween had been ruined for me and set up a surprise party for my family, and I'm very grateful to them for that. The neighbors were also furious about Tracy and agreed that we had every right to send her to an elderly home. She was warned about the number of kids that had lived here and yet chose to subject herself to her own hatred. What do you think? Should we have done more? Thank you, and happy Halloween. I was sitting on the beach just enjoying the big waves when the meanest girl in our grade came up to me. Her name was Grace, and she was mean to everyone. She saw I was wearing an older beat-up bathing suit and she decided she didn't like it.
Hey Norma, where'd you get that bathing suit? Because it looks like you got it out of the dumpster.
Well, hello there, young one. My name is Norma, and my husband and I are millionaires, all thanks to my adopted son, Joe. But it wasn't always this way. I used to be poor and get picked on every day, and even ended up having a miscarriage. Well, there's a lot to unpack here, so let me start from the very beginning. My husband's name is Jim, and we met back in high school. We were the classic high school sweethearts that you read about in books and see in movies. I still remember the first day he asked me out. It was the hottest summer evening of the year, and my whole class was at the beach, enjoying our annual class trip. I was sitting on the beach just enjoying the big waves when the meanest girl in our grade came up to me. Her name was Grace, and she was mean to everyone. She saw I was wearing an older beat-up bathing suit and she decided she didn't like it.
Hey Norma, where'd you get that bathing suit? Because it looks like you got it out of the dumpster.
That's not true, and actually, that hurts my feelings. I got it from my mother. It was all she could afford.
That sucks. Look at my bathing suit. It's brand new, and from a designer brand, it was almost $300.
I wish I could have something like that.
Maybe if you weren't such a loser, you'll never be able to have something like this, so don't even dream about it.
I felt my eyes begin to heat up and could tell I was seconds away from bursting into tears. Just then, Jim approached us and demanded that Grace leave me alone. Grace left but muttered something under her breath as she walked away. I got up and hugged Jim and thanked him for standing up for me. I asked them if there was anything I could do to return the favor, and he said yes, you can go on a date with me. I immediately accepted and couldn't wait for our first date, which was going to take place at a local drive-in movie theater. When the big night had finally arrived, I put on my favorite jacket and did my makeup real nice, and headed out to meet Jim at the movie. We got into his car and began talking before the movie started.
So, have you ever been to the drive-in movies before?
No, I usually spend my time writing. I love to write, mostly fiction.
No way. I actually love reading fiction. I'm in school right now, studying to be an editor. I would love to read some of your stories and give you some feedback.
That would be amazing. At that moment, I knew me and Jim had something special. We had a blast on our first date, and we quickly became an item. On our third date, Jim asked me to be his girlfriend, and it was the easiest yes I ever had to say. I loved sending my drafts of fiction short stories to Jim, to have him edit them. This became our special thing. Dating Jim was a dream, and I quickly fell in love with him. We dated throughout high school with no problems, until one day during senior year.
Hey Norma, I heard you've been dating Jim for a while now.
Hey Grace. Yes, I really like him. He smells amazing, and he's the best editor I've ever worked with.
Well, isn't that special? 2 losers fell in love, and now they're going to have a big loser wedding and have many loser babies. Isn't that right, Norma?
Some people just don't change, do they?
Not this again. Leave her alone, Grace.
Shut up, Jim. At least I'm not poor like you are. I'm rich, which means I am better than you. Now get out of my sight.
This was the first time I saw Jim cry. See, Jim also came from a poor family, and he tried to hide it as best he could. His father died at a very young age, which left his mom to play the role of mother and father, as she had to work and raise her children. One day, they had to eat crackers for dinner. This was when Jim realized he was poor. Despite me and Jim being poor, we are still nice to everyone, and we are both very hard workers. We are determined to not end up in a bad financial situation like our parents. Fast forward a couple of years, after me and Jim had graduated and had long forgotten about the mean words from Grace. Jim worked in a factory, and I was working as a secretary. It was a cool October night when me and Jim had hiked up a mountain to see our favorite lookout, when he got down on one knee and proposed to me. He told me how beautiful I was, and how I was his person. I couldn't believe it. I was going to get married to the man of my dreams. Our families were very supportive of our decision, but we knew the reality of our situation, and agreed to have a small wedding of only very close friends and family. All that mattered was that I was getting married to the man I love most, my Jimmy. After our honeymoon, I began to feel a little sick. I kept throwing up, and I didn't know what to do. I expressed how weird I felt to Jim and begged him for an answer. Jim, I keep throwing up and I feel dizzy. What should I do?
I think I might know what's going on.
Well, don't keep it a secret. What is it?
I think you might be pregnant.
Oh my gosh. You're right. We're going to have a baby. I love you so much.
I love you too, baby.
From then on, having our baby and starting a family was all I could think about. We picked a name, set up a baby room, and even started saving money for our child's college fund. Everything was going perfectly until tragedy struck one morning. I woke up early one morning with a severe pain coming from my abdomen. I looked down and saw that our bed was covered in blood. I gasped, which woke up Jim, who immediately sprung into action. He got me to the car and rushed me to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, I was immediately seen by the doctor. I held my breath as I waited for my results. Jim held my hand and told me everything would be okay, but he would turn out to be wrong.
Norma and Jim, I have some horrible news.
I can't take it anymore. Tell us.
You've had a miscarriage.
His words echoed in my head for hours. I couldn't believe what I had heard. Just as I was so close to happiness, it was all taken away from me. Me and Jim went home that day and just held each other, crying. I stayed home the next couple of days and tried to recover. It got even worse when a mysterious letter came to our house. I opened the letter and was horrified at what I read. The letter was from Grace, and it explained that her husband was the doctor who treated me, and he had told her everything. She wrote that I deserved what had happened to me, and that I would have been a horrible mother anyway. As soon as I read this, I ripped it up and threw it away. I think I cried for 3 days straight after that. Fast forward a couple of years, and Jim came to me one day with an idea. He proposed the idea of adopting a child, since I was too damaged to try and have another one of my own. After a little bit of convincing, I decided it was a good idea, and together we filled out the paperwork to adopt a child. When it was finally time to pick up our child, I was extremely nervous. I wasn't sure if it had been a good idea to adopt a child. I wasn't sure if it was going to feel real. These worries melted away as soon as I held my son, Oliver. Oliver was a beautiful blonde baby boy, and as soon as I held him, I knew he was meant to be raised by me and Jim. Me and Jim dedicated our lives to Oliver, and he grew quick. Even as a toddler, Oliver began taking an interest in acting. We signed him up for acting classes when he was only 8 years old, and absolutely fell in love with the art of acting. When Oliver graduated high school, he got his first role in a TV show. We weren't sure if he was getting his hopes too high by going down this career, but we were so happy for him when we saw that his show became the #1 show across the country, making him a star. From there, Oliver began getting acting jobs left and right, appearing in movies next to the stars me and Jim had grown up on. We were beyond proud of Oliver, and we couldn't believe he had done so well. It was obvious our son was making millions of dollars, as he began to gift us with riches of all kinds. He gave us designer clothes and foreign cars, and mountains of diamond jewelry. One day, he outdid himself when he told us he had bought us a house on the beach. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw how beautiful the house was. When we first moved into our new mansion, Jim and I decided to go for a walk. While on this walk, we saw a woman digging through a dumpster and felt so bad for her, as it reminded us of our past lives of being poor. We approached the woman and were about to give her a $100 bill when we recognized her. I gasped when I realized it was Grace. She looked horrible, and she explained that she was homeless. She told us how her husband had left her when he found out how evil she was. She saw the $100 bill in our hand and reached for it, but Jim pulled it away.
Well, don't you think you could help me out?
No, I don't think so, Grace. You would have never helped me out, and you were always awful to me.
Come on, that was years ago. You guys are so rich now. Surely you can help me out.
Not today, loser.
As we walked away, we couldn't help but laugh. Some people might say our actions were too harsh, but I disagree. I think she totally deserved what happened to her. What do you think? Ever since I was adopted by my family, life had been perfect. They took care of me the best they could, taking me wherever I wanted to go and letting me do almost anything I wanted. They were very different from me, but I didn't mind. We would often get stared at because people didn't understand how we could be so different, which honestly I found kind of silly. I guess people don't really understand how a family with an adopted daughter could be so happy. The only thing that mattered was that my parents loved me just as much as I loved them. But when they had first adopted me, I could tell there was some hesitance. I was the last kid left in the adoption center, so I was the only option they had. At first, I wasn't even sure if they'd go through with it. But sure enough, they signed all the paperwork, and we went home together that day. My parents have always homeschooled me for some reason, but one day they decided to register me for normal public school.
We've taught you all we know. It's only fair if you're allowed to go to public school. We wouldn't want you falling behind because of us.
It made sense in my head, but I still wasn't 100% sure. The only depiction of public schools I'd seen were in the movies, and in all of those, there were always bullies who picked on the new kids. I thought this was how all schools would be, since that's all I ever saw. Naturally, I was terrified to go into a new school. I didn't want to get bullied and have my lunch money stolen. Being new in a place where everyone already knew each other was also just as terrifying. I tried to protest. Do I have to? What about the bullies? I don't want to be bullied since I'd be new. My dad only laughed and gently shook his head.
You know that's only in the movies, right? That almost never happens in real life. That's why you need to go to school, so you're able to learn more about the world.
I gave in, since I knew he was probably right, and there was nothing I could do about it. And so I began going to school. I wasn't the top of my class, but I was doing well enough for my parents to still be very proud of me. I didn't make many friends, but I didn't really want any to begin with. I was fine by myself, and I honestly preferred things like that. However, I wouldn't feel that way for long. All too soon, I'd wish I had surrounded myself with more people. Because one dreadful day, I heard my parents talking.
I just think one more couldn't hurt, right?
Maybe you're right. This time, they'd be ours though, right? We wouldn't be adopting another one.
Yes, of course. We get stared at already with that one. We don't need to add to that with another.
If it's what you really want, then I guess I don't see much of a problem.
I wasn't 100% sure, but it sounded like that they were talking about me. But I was confused what they were referring to. I wasn't sure how to feel at the time because nothing they were saying made sense. However, in a few months, I would understand perfectly. As time went on, it became very obvious that my mom was pregnant, and instantly it clicked in my head. They had been talking about having another child, but if that was true, that means they were also talking about me, and since I didn't fully understand what they were talking about, I chose to ignore it. A few months later, I had a baby sister. Everything was going fine at first. We all got along, the new baby was easy to take care of. But that didn't last. She started demanding more and more attention from our parents. After a while, they'd hardly ever spoke to me. In school, I was getting straight A's on my report card, and they'd pay me almost no attention. It was as if nothing that I did was ever good enough for them. They would only give me the bare minimum of praise.
That's nice, dear.
Why don't you go study in your room?
I was honestly shocked. I couldn't believe my parents could do this to me. One day, I overheard a conversation that would change my life for the worse.
2 is too much. We can't handle them.
Yeah, I thought it'd be easier, but both are incredibly hard to manage.
So what should we do?
Can we just make a return at the adoption center? I'd rather keep our own flesh and blood if we had to choose between them.
My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It only got worse as I listened.
I don't think they do. We'd have to just leave her in a box or something.
On the side of the road?
Or somewhere safer like the sidewalk, but we could leave it anywhere, I guess.
And with that, I ran out of the house crying. It wasn't something that I had planned, so I didn't take any of my things, but I didn't look back. I had thought they really loved me. But once they had a kid of their own, they were ready to just throw me out. It was so unfair, I wanted to scream. I was out on the streets now, so I'd have to find somewhere to live. In a panic, I found a few boxes next to a shop and set them up in an alley so that I'd be able to sleep in them and keep warm. I cried myself to sleep that night as I knew that I was officially homeless, and I didn't care if anyone heard. My parents had been ready to throw me out. For the second time in my life, I had been abandoned. Only this time it hurt so much more. I spent days out on the streets, eating whatever I could find, just trying to survive on my own. Until one day,
Little girl, are you all right?
I looked around for the voice I'd heard to find a tall woman, dressed in a gold dress with a really big white hat on, and round sunglasses looking at me. What?
Are you all right?
Oh,
you poor thing. I'll take you to my house if you'd like. That, so you won't be out in the streets anymore, is dangerous out here.
Yes, sure. And with that, I was whisked away to her home, a 3-story mansion in the middle of a secluded forest. She took me inside, where she gave me food, the best food I'd had in a very, very long time, and showed me where I would be sleeping. It was a massive bedroom, 5x bigger than my old one. I was still in shock from everything. I couldn't believe this was actually happening. It seemed almost too good to be true, and yet it was. The woman told me her name was Madeline, and she'd be more than happy to take me in as her own. From that day on, I lived with her in her giant house. I got all the food I could ever want, and got to do whatever I'd like again. We went into town together, and I went with her on vacation all around the world. Of course, I never asked for more than what I'd been given. I didn't want to seem greedy or anything, but she cared for me as if I was her own, and it made me feel very special. I was living a life I would never in a million years think that I would ever be able to live, and it was magical. Madeline had a grown-up son who lived in another city and had wanted a daughter, but she wasn't able to conceive due to her age. Madeline had become my new mother and had even filed the proper paperwork to adopt me. It was a dream come true, and when I got older, she even paid for me to go to prestigious university. When I had ran away, I didn't fathom that my life would have turned out this way. But then I got some terrible news. My former parents sent a letter while I was away at university. Tragedy had struck. My little sister had become very ill and had passed away. The mix of emotions were so confusing. On the one hand, they had been eager to just abandon me, but on the other, I did feel saddened, as my sister, who I had known and loved for years, passed away. Madeline was very supportive, though, which made it easier. As if that wasn't shocking enough, though, my former parents were begging for me to come back and live with them. They claimed that they now knew that they had made a mistake and that they desperately wanted me to come home and for us to be a family again. It took me all of 2 seconds to decide. After all, Madeline loved me for who I was and didn't care that I was adopted. She had shown me true love and was a caring and supportive parent, while my former parents were planning on throwing me away as soon as I was a bit of an inconvenience to them. And so I crumpled up the letter and threw it away and never spoke to them again. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.